there's a way to make an entrance.
This is my destiny.
It was now a conspiracy of witches.
Download Veely today.
For over a century, the legendary tales that have surrounded our great British airfields have inspired generations of people, including me, which is why I am on a personal mission to cross the UK to visit some of our most important airfields, to understand not just about their contribution to our past, but importantly, how many of them have helped define our future. From the UK's first flight, through to groundbreaking innovations such as carbon fibre and the jet engine, and the extraordinary effort spent on preserving our aviation heritage. Join me as I explore the story of the airfields that have helped shape Britain and the world. Well, today we are diving into the story of the flying boat. This shingle bank is known as Calshot Spit on the south coast of Hampshire, overlooking the Solent and the Isle of Wight beyond. And in terms of the story of the Great British Airfield, it's unique because, unlike almost every other airfield, it doesn't have a runway. Why? Well, because it didn't need one. Samuel Cody's first flight in the UK in 1908 started a revolution in aviation. Groups of enthusiasts around the country taught themselves how to fly and constructed their own aircraft. It wasn't long before the government became interested and started scouting for an ideal location along the coast. Colin, the view from up here on top of the Coast Guard Tower at the northern end of the Calshot Spit really does give us a terrific overview of the natural geography that I suppose in many ways created the perfect seaplane base. If this shingle bank had been man-made, it couldn't have been designed any better.
You're absolutely right. It's the perfect location. It juts out into the southern end of Southampton Water. It's got 3 land masses to protect it from bad weather. New Forest to the west, mainland Hampshire to the east, and the Isle of Wight to the south. It's also got 3 separate water access points. The lagoon, which is very sheltered for most of the time, with Southampton Water behind it. And then to the south, we've got the 2 arms of the Solent, ideal for operating small, light, frail seaplanes and the heavier flying boats that were operated from here a little later.
When was Calshot first recognised as a potential airbase?
Well, the instruction went out from the government to create an air department for the Navy in 1912, and very soon after that instruction, suitable locations were identified. Calshot was one of the prime ones. They were scattered all around the coast, from the north of Scotland right round to Pembroke Dock in Wales, and Calshot was readily identified as being suitable for one such base for operations.
But once Calshot becomes established, it acts like a magnet for aircraft manufacturers who flock to this part of the country.
It was a major boat building and operating area, so the skills for building marine type aircraft, seaplanes and flying boats, were already in place from the boat building industries, of which there was a lot around. Supermarine, of course, the best known, based up in Southampton, started in 1913, but other names that are as well known: Vickers, Sopwith, Ferry, Avro, Saunders Row behind us, to the west, de Havilland, and many others. There were 26, 28 different manufacturers in this area.
Calshot was created naturally, but it was designed really for the seaplane, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. The identification of a need for seaplanes for an aerial surveillance operation for the Navy. The Navy weren't initially too keen on aircraft at all, but it was eventually realised that they were ideal for spotting purposes. As the submarine threat and surface vessel threats grew, so spotter aircraft became armed aircraft. They had to defend themselves, then they became attack aircraft, and the small seaplanes became larger flying boats. And Calshot grew from originally being an evaluation and testing establishment into a training centre, and that continued right up to the start of the Second World War.
I mean, talking about this fascinating subject, we talk about seaplanes and flying boats. there is a crucial difference between the two. How would you explain it?
In layman's terms, a seaplane is usually a smaller aircraft. The wheels are removed and replaced by floats. So the floats are on the water and the aeroplane stands above the water on those floats.
And the flying boat?
The flying boat is an aircraft whose fuselage has been shaped as a boat hull. So instead of being cylindrical, has an inverted V at the bottom. Its hull sits in the water rather than above the water.
Now the terminology sounds obvious today, but who coined the word seaplane initially?
Winston Churchill is accredited with coming up with that word seaplane first. When he made his first flight from Hamble here to Calshot in August 1913, to have his first flight in an aircraft type that was at that time described generically as a hydravion, the French word, he is said to have coined the phrase seaplane, and it's stuck ever since.
The first aircraft to arrive at Calshot in 1913 was the Bat boat, designed by Sopwith Aviation. Thomas Sopwith was a pioneer. It was his love of flying and speedboats that led him to the seaplane, and together with S.E. Saunders Boatyard on the Isle of Wight, they built the Bat boat.
Well, the Bat boat, it was an innovative design in that it used an existing technology in marine craft as the basis of the hull, and it was essentially the first real flying boat as opposed to aircraft that just skimmed over the water on floats or with skis. The basic hull is a classic Saunders hull, so you could have put an engine in it and driven it as a boat. The wing structure is a conventional biplane wing with struts and bracing wires all tensioned up, so you've got a light structure with great strength. The engine was situated right in the centre of the aircraft between the wings, with a large propeller pushing the aircraft from behind. Some people ask how the name Bat boat came about. Well, it's nothing to do with Batman and Robin, because they weren't around then, but it was from a mythical boat in a Rudyard Kipling short story that was very fast and had a sort of wing-like structure on it. So the name Bat boat was derived from this Rudyard Kipling story.
The first flight of the Bat boat was carried out by Thomas Sopwith before he handed over to his number 2, Harry Hawker. Hawker impressed the War Office by flying from 35 to 75 miles an hour and climbing to 1,000 feet in just over 2 minutes, with a passenger and 4 hours fuel on board.
The Bat boat was seen as a spotting aircraft and also the possibility of maybe dropping bombs or attacking. So Calshot, being just across the water from the Solent, was a natural place for it to go. Then, probably due to the needs of the First World War, the emphasis really rested on float planes for the smaller missions, and the flying boats were used mainly for the longer range patrol missions. And really it was the personalities and the people behind the original factories that had the drive to keep the industry together, creating, you could say, almost a moving art form. Those skills, I think, just got to admire it, what was done, and all the developments were done in materials and technology. It's an incredible story.
In July 1914, the Royal Navy reformed its air branch and became the Royal Naval Air Service, and they took over the Calshot base. The station's role expanded to take on the protection of shipping in the English Channel. A variety of flying boats were introduced, including the White Seaplane and the Short 184. It wasn't long before the new aircraft were put to the test.
They had moved towards training aircrew, weapons training, target hitting, torpedo dropping. The first successful torpedo strike was dropped by an aircraft flown by the station commander here the week before the outbreak of the First World War. And as the war progressed, so the aircraft were then diverted to channel patrols, reconnaissance work, looking for enemy vessels, surface vessels and U-boats, and working with units from other areas, Portland, Eastbourne, even Calais and Dover. They were successful in their attacks on enemy shipping.
Now, anti-submarine warfare from the air was clearly in its infancy. How many U-boats did the crews from here manage to sink?
There were successful strikes on U-boats, but not in any large number. It was more a case of they were being used as spotter aircraft, so our surface vessels could then find them. But nevertheless, I think they flew something in excess of 9,000 hours of patrol flying from here during that period.
On a calm day like today, Colin, looking at that lovely original Sopwith hangar, is it possible for you to imagine what Calshot was like back in those days?
Indeed, yeah, it would have been crowded. There are just 3 hangars remaining now, but in those days there were 6 growing to 7, 8 eventually under construction. All of the maintenance and training buildings that were required, the schoolrooms, the classrooms, the dormitories even, the accommodations, the railway line that ran through the middle, the men, the machines, yeah, it was a very busy place.
On the 1st of April 1918, the British Army's Royal Flying Corps and the Royal Navy Air Service combined to form the Royal Air Force, making it at the time the largest air force in the world. And in 1922, the prominent flying boat station became RAF Calshot.
With the First World War over, aircraft designers were free to spend some time improving their aircraft designs. Calshot became a site for coastal reconnaissance and a training unit for flying boats. But it also became home to the high-speed flight. I've come here to the Solent Sky Museum in Southampton to take a closer look at one of the flight's most famous aircraft.
The Schneider Trophy was started by a French engineer, Jacques Schneider, in 1913. The annual race was intended to encourage technical advances in civil aviation, but it soon became a contest for pure speed. The trophy was completed twice before being put on hold for the First World War. But as soon as peace resumed, they were back in business, and in 1929, the competition came to Calshot.
Well, Andy, here it is. This is what I've come to see. I never expected to see an original example of this kind of aircraft still surviving. It is remarkable.
This is the jewel in our collection of aircraft. This is the 1929 Supermarine S6A, and it's an aircraft which was built specifically for the Schneider Trophy.
Now, the trophy itself is legendary, and it's immortalised, I suppose, in the film The First of the Few, the story of Mitchell, the designer of this aircraft, and of course, the Spitfire. But what was it about the trophy that made it so alluring to aircraft designers?
Well, the trophy, it was a huge, glamorous affair. It was all about pure speed, of getting these aircraft up and getting them around the course as quick as possible, which really attracted not only the designers at the time, but also the different nations.
Yeah.
It was really seen as a thing of national pride to win the Schneider Trophy.
I suppose the nearest equivalent today would be Formula One, with the money, the glamour, the technology, and the huge press interest that goes with it.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And you think of modern Formula One drivers as superstars in their own right. The pilots who flew these aircraft back then, they were front-page headlines. They were real pin-ups at the time as well.
But how important was the Schneider Trophy in accelerating aircraft development at the time?
Oh, it was massively important. They were then using that knowledge and then putting it into their next design of aircraft. What happened with this one, what Mitchell learnt, all these interesting aerodynamic pieces that he came up with, he then put straight into his next design of aircraft, which was the Spitfire.
And we have one conveniently sat next to us here in beautiful, beautiful condition. And you can certainly see the way the pedigree translates from the predecessor to the most iconic aircraft, arguably, in the world, one could say.
Absolutely.
But there is, of course, one major difference between the Spitfire and this aircraft, in that the Spitfire is resting on its wheels, and this one, of course, has floats. Why was the Schneider Trophy predicated on seaplanes?
Right, well, the idea was that the future of aviation would be with flying boats and seaplanes. The reason being that most of our major cities are either on a big river or on a coastal port. And, of course, if you're going to use passenger aircraft, big passenger aircraft, it makes sense to have them to be able to take off and land on water.
The story of the Schneider Trophy is now synonymous with Mitchell and, of course, the evolution of the Spitfire. But who were the competition?
Well, initially with the Schneider Trophy, before the First World War, it was a lot of privateers, people with a lot of money to spend on these aircraft. Some built them themselves and some private companies entered aircraft. But when we get to 1929, when this particular aircraft was built, the competition effectively are nations which are America, the UK, Italy and France. And all these are backed by large amounts of money given by the government.
In terms of Calshot, how important was the Schneider Trophy in establishing it as a base?
Well, Calshot was great In the late 1920s, the high-speed flight, which had been formed specially to take on the Schneider Trophy, moved down to Calshot. And Calshot was a great location. On top of that, when it came to the actual competition days, and the course being run over the Isle of Wight down to Portsmouth and back, the Solent was a fantastic place for all the public to come and watch it. Because bear in mind, these aircraft are going very fast. Now, if you see an aeroplane at 500 feet doing sort of 300 miles an hour, it's gone pretty quickly. So to be able to sit there and actually look over the Solent and see it going right the way round was a great spectacle for the public. And that was important, the public engaging with this.
And what kind of speeds were they trying to attain back in 1929, 1930, 31?
The speeds were literally tumbling almost weekly. As another nation produced another aircraft, they were breaking world speed records, left, right and centre. They were aiming for a speed during the Schneider Trophy in 1931, around about 350 miles an hour. The next couple of days after they won the trophy, George Stainforth took one of these aircraft up from Calshot and actually broke the 400 mile an hour record right over the Solent. And you think about 400 miles an hour in 1931, when milk's still being delivered by horse and cart. That's a hell of a speed.
And when you think about it, it's only 20 years, really, since the first commercially useful aircraft really gets airborne. And yet in 20 years, you're attaining speeds of nearly 400 miles an hour. The effects on the pilots were probably less understood than they were on the airframe and the aircraft itself.
Absolutely. The pilots flying this discovered this phenomenon that as they turned tight in a corner when they were doing high speed, they suffered from something they referred to as fading out. They couldn't understand it. They were actually, their eyelids were getting heavy and they were losing their vision. We now understand that they were going under enormous G and they were actually starting to black out. Yeah. So these guys were, this is it, they were right at the front of that envelope pushing this, you know, not just the aircraft, but the effects on the pilot as well. So
it's not just the science of engineering, but it's also the science of medicine in a sense, which is being tested.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Can we take a closer look?
Oh, by all means, come and have a look. Right.
God, this is a treat. It's very compact, isn't it?
It's tiny. You can get up here and have a look. There you go, if you watch yourself on there. So if I flip that open for you.
There we go. Wow, it is absolutely tiny, isn't it? And of course there's no obvious forward vision.
Absolutely not. No, you can't see anything forward. You've got to rely on your crew to make sure they've cleared the way for you.
Can I get in?
You can have a go.
They were a lot smaller in those days, weren't they?
Oh, I think they were.
Now, am I right in saying, Andy, that this aircraft featured in the film, the first of the few?
Yeah, that's right. She was used as a prop in the film, and David Niven was sat exactly where you're trying to sit at the moment.
That was going to be my next question. How exciting is that?
Great.
So I'm not just following in Mitchell's footsteps, but also in David Niven's.
Absolutely. All you're missing is a slick back hair and a handlebar moustache. So.
Oh, my goodness me. Do you know, I hate to say it, but I think that's as far as I can go.
I know, you're not a big guy, but you think about cramming yourself in there. This is all red hot because the radiator's underneath you. There's oil chucking up in your face. You can't see where you're going. Amazing, isn't it?
Get out. Andy, that is absolutely remarkable. What a treat. I mean, not only have I followed in the footsteps of aviation history, but also in terms of movie history as well.
Absolutely.
Thanks a lot, mate.
No problem.
What a treat.
Good stuff.
But it wasn't just speed that was being developed at RAF Calshot. An Italian inventor, Guglielmo Marconi, saw the flying boats as a good way of testing his wireless radio in aircraft. With the largest maritime fleet, Britain was an obvious market for the long-distance system.
So Marconi began to spend time with the officers at Calshot and also to work with them to develop a system of wireless communications that might be suitable for seaplanes. They'd begun first using airships because the early apparatus was very, very, very heavy and some of the early aircraft just didn't have the engine power. But there was a clear and urgent need for wireless communications with aircraft, and so it was Marconi and his company that began to experiment before World War I to develop wireless systems suitable for communication in aircraft, including seaplanes. Marconi's wireless system worked on a very basic level. There was a transmitter and there was a receiver. So an electromagnetic wave would come from a spark transmitter that would come through the aerial here and then into the coherer. When the electric voltage passed through the coherer, the metal filings would cohere together, they would conduct to complete a circuit, and the circuit could be used to detect electromagnetic waves. So it was a very, very crude system, but it was a working system. And it was a working system of wireless telegraphy that could be used to pick up signals using Morse code. So when I send this signal here using this here, you can see that the coherer picks it up.
As the demand for aircraft communication grew, a new solution was needed. The position of enemy artillery and U-boats needed to be conveyed quickly back to base. Marconi developed radio valves, which could be used for radio telephony, so they could listen to voice instead of simple Morse code.
The radio valves meant that they could pick up continuous wave signals, but it also meant they could pick up radio telephony signals. So instead of listening to Morse code, the pilot was able to listen to voice, which made it much, much easier. These two sets, which are examples of civilian sets from the early 1920s, they were used in civilian aviation. So the technology made the transition from the military to the civilian, and these contributed to aviation communications in the 1920s and the eventual introduction of air traffic control systems, which contributed massively to the development of aviation safety.
Calshot had secured its place as the home of the Seaplane, and with some of the biggest names in aviation based in the area, advances in technology and speed would aid the design of some of the most iconic aircraft of World War II.
During the 1930s, RAF Calshot continued the development of flying boats, but at the outbreak of the Second World War, its location here on the south coast and its close proximity to targets such as Portsmouth and Southampton made it easy prey for German bombers, and operational flights here were moved. As a result, the base concentrated on the repair and maintenance of flying boats, in particular the short Sunderland.
Sunderland was first designed in the early 1930s, and it was designed by the Short brothers at Rochester, one of the most famous names in aviation history. The Sunderland was designed to go long distances over the ocean to watch over, protect our maritime trade. But it had many other roles as well, foisted upon it over the years, and it was very much a multi-combat aircraft in the end.
The short Sunderland came into service in 1937, and over 700 were built. It could carry between 9 and 11 crew members. The huge aircraft had a wingspan of 112 feet and a length of 85, and could reach speeds of over 200 miles an hour. Its armoury was huge, with up to 18 Browning machine guns and the ability to carry bombs, mines and depth charges. The Germans nicknamed the Sunderland the Flying Porcupine due to its awesome defensive firepower.
To attack a U-boat was a very dangerous game. Sunderlands would have to come in at, say, 100 feet over the water, straight and level for a mile, to aiming for a very small target, which is firing back at you and moving very fast. And then the idea was to drop their depth charges, which were like a naval depth charge, each side of the U-boat. It was what they termed a straddle. And the idea was to get, say, 3 depth charges one side, 3 another, and then the joint explosion at, say, 25 feet would rupture the hull of the U-boat and send it to the bottom. Sunderlands are so rare nowadays, but we've got a genuine Battle of the Atlantic survivor, a Mark I Sunderland which sank in November 1940. And we've recovered many items from it. 2 engines, lots of cockpit parts, so many things that tell a story of this particular aircraft. Like these from the engines itself, the Pegasus engines. And this is how this valve comes out of the water. Very much encrusted, sometimes even worse than this. And then by the dedicated efforts of our volunteers, we turn it into this. And we can even split it into component parts as well. Without the Sunderland, we would have been in a parlous state in the Second World War. It was one of our major assets and probably one of the most famous aircraft as well.
When Allied aircraft were shot down over enemy territory or forced to ditch over the sea, more than not, their lives depended on homing pigeons rather than the communications technology on board. At Calshot, they assessed various ways to release the birds as new aircraft designs became available.
Well, Stuart, Calshot seems a long way from here on the borders in the Malvern Hills.
But not for pigeons, you know. In the First World War they flew relatively short distances. Second World War they flew very long distances, and it's been recorded one of the medal-winning pigeons flew 480 miles with a message.
Now, many people will be surprised at the use of pigeons given the amount of communications technology that was on board aircraft during the Second World War.
If an airplane had been shot down and you're the navigator bobbing around in a dinghy, you've got no access to the radio. So your good old pigeon is the way that you get a message back saying help. So the navigator would carry a box of 2 pigeons and it would tie a message onto the pigeon's leg with the coordinates calling for help. And they save many, many lives.
So how many pigeons have we got in here now?
We've got a dozen today, and they're from the loft that's at Tewkesbury, about 4 miles away, and they're all very experienced seasoned pigeon. As you can see, the weather's not ideal today.
And Stuart, what is it about the pigeon that makes it so well suited?
Well, they're just incredibly hardy. They've got this kind of dogged determination to get home. You know, there are well-recorded examples of pigeons flying home with bullets through its breast, one with a leg shot off, holes through its wings and so on, and covered in oil. You know, from a downed aircraft, they were covered in oil, and they still managed to get those messages home. And it's just very brave, very determined animals.
And presumably there are awards issued to anybody who found a pigeon.
Anybody finding a pigeon would have to take the message to the local police, and it was very rapidly escalated up the chain of command. And because time was of the essence, and it could make a difference, a few hours could make a difference between saving an aircrew's life, so vitally important. And the pigeons that brought these messages back were widely feted.
So how effective was it?
Very effective, and the actual percentage I'll write onto a piece of paper and put it onto a leg carrier, and I'll put it onto a pigeon.
So who's going to be the lucky bird to carry that?
I'm going to pick a pigeon at random, because at the end of the day they were picked at random to go with the air crews.
Yeah.
And hopefully when we get back we'll be able to answer it.
Well, it's a filthy day for flying. I don't envy you pigeons, actually.
Come on. Come here. Here you go.
Oh, there we go. That really is at random. And it just got a clips onto the leg?
Yeah, it clips onto the leg. Yeah.
Very simply. They're not bothered, are they?
No, not at all.
And how old can a pigeon live for?
The oldest pigeon on our record is actually 38.
38?
Yeah.
There we go.
There you go. I'll put her back in.
Yep.
And then we'll release them all together.
So there she is, back in the cage.
All ready to go?
Right then, so it's a simple case of
letting them go.
Right.
Here you go. Come on then. Off you go. Come on then.
Go on then.
Come on then.
Go on then. Hey! Tail end Charlie. Brilliant. Well, Stuart, here we are back at Pigeon Central.
Yes.
Are they starting to come back in now?
Yeah, they're coming back now.
You've got some other pigeons flying around here, but...
Yeah, those are our young birds, and they live in the loft behind us,
yeah.
And the experienced pigeons are just arriving back now.
Are they all back?
I believe so. They're beginning to split off the bunch. There
Look,
they go,
look
there's some more coming. There you
That's
go.
incredible. Now, the key question is...
Is the message there?
Is the message there? Yeah, exactly. Come on, let's have a look.
Right. Here we go. Okay, I think Jeremy's going to hand it to us. There we go. Here's the pigeon with the message on its leg.
You just unclip that?
Yeah, I'll just take it off. Come here, and I'll hand the brave pigeon back to his owner, Jeremy.
Well done, you pigeon. Thanks, Jeremy.
Thank you.
Just to remind ourselves, I asked you the question: how successful were pigeons in getting their messages back home?
Right. Okay.
You wrote the answer on this bit of paper earlier.
I did, and this number may well surprise you. It's a combination of the success rate in World War I, where they flew very short distances, and World War II.
Yeah.
And the combined total was a total of 96%.
That's incredible. But what was the furthest distance ever recorded for a pigeon bringing back a message during the war?
Within the Second World War, they flew many hundreds of miles, typically, 300-400 miles. And today I've got a medal awarded to a pigeon called Mercury. And Mercury flew back from occupied Denmark 480 miles with a message.
That's incredible. And this is the original medal?
That's the original medal, yeah. It's a Dickin medal. They're the Animal Victoria Crosses.
For gallantry, we also serve.
Yep.
That's lovely, isn't it? And on the back, what do we got? Oh, Mercury, Army Pigeon Service, Special Section, Denmark, 1942.
Yep, and because Mercury was an experienced pigeon, he'd flown back from the continent on numerous occasions before his special mission, and his special mission was to bring a message back about German warships leaving Denmark to attack Allied convoys.
Brilliant. And it seems rather fitting then that Mercury, the messenger of the gods, should have won this particular medal. And it's interesting, Stuart, because these days pigeons tend to get a bad press, particularly in our urban areas. But actually, we've got a lot to thank them for. They're not just pests, are they?
No.
They're heroes in their own right.
They're very much heroes. And in the First World War and the Second World War, saved many thousands of lives. So yeah, very brave, very, very brave animals.
At the end of the war, in 1945, Calshot grew in size once again, when 2 squadrons arrived, 201 followed by 230, both equipped with Sunderlands. Defeated Germany had been divided into occupied zones, American, British, French and Soviet. But Berlin was also split, so no one country could rule the capital. But by 1948, the Russians wanted Berlin for themselves.
During the Berlin crisis of 1948, Calshot Sunderlands were once again called into action. Flying from temporary bases near Hamburg, they flew right into the heart of Berlin itself, using the city's lakes, bringing in food and evacuating children.
We knew that, of course, the Russians had decided to close the land borders from their zone of Germany to prevent the Allied convoys from travelling overland by rail or by road to Berlin, where, of course, we had the 3 Western Allied sectors in West Berlin, French, American and British. And with the borders closed, land borders, there was no other way we could supply Berlin.
With no food getting to the capital by land, the only alternative was by air. The British air corridor went from Hamburg to the British sector of West Berlin.
At first, it created a problem at Hamburg because the normal facilities we had at Calshot for mooring the aircraft and for refuelling were not available in the normal way. To begin with, therefore, we had a refueling problem, and we were limited to about 1 sortie a day. But within a week, a normal standard RAF refueling barge had been brought out by ship, and then once we'd got that, we were able to carry out very rapid turnarounds, and each crew then were flying at least 2 to 3 round trips to Berlin every day.
The operation became known as the Berlin Airlift and lasted for more than a year. It brought in more than 2.3 million tonnes of essential supplies to the beleaguered city.
The Sunderland was chosen because it had a large capacity, and so it was, from that point of view, ideal. And apart from the types of cargo we took, which were mostly tinned food that could be easily transported, apart from that, the Sunderland was also, to some extent, protected against salt corrosion. And therefore, one of our cargoes also was the salt, which was a necessary ingredient. We carried 10,000 pounds weight of cargo each run. And for a time, although we came back empty, then Berlin itself was starting to manufacture goods to be exported to the West. And so we were bringing back cargo from Berlin. And then eventually the food situation got rather desperate, and therefore they decided that young children from Berlin should be flown out to Western Germany. And so we had the pleasure, in fact, and enjoyment of carrying these kids out from Berlin.
At the height of the Berlin airlift, a supply aircraft took off or landed in West Berlin every 30 seconds, making a total of nearly 300,000 flights. The Calshot Sunderlands alone performed over 1,000 sorties.
Now, this was one of the last aircraft to land at Calshot. It is, of course, a short Sunderland. This one was built in 1943 and then converted to civilian use in 1947, when technically it became a short Sandringham. Now, in a series that frankly has spoilt us with some of the most beautifully preserved historic aircraft in the world, picking a favourite is tricky, but this is mine, and I'll tell you why. You see, modern air travel is fast, it's cheap, but we are shoveled into airliners like cattle. There's no sense of romance or elegance or luxury about it. But imagine taking off from the Solent and heading down to Singapore on a 7-day odyssey in one of these. It's much more sociable, there's loads of legroom, 5-star service, there was even a bar, and you could go to sleep. You take off and land in the south of France one night, then head down to the Nile, and then drop in for drinks on Lake Victoria. I love the Sunderland because I think it could work again. And this is the cockpit. Here we are, the upper deck, the business end of this particular Sunderland. And imagine all the sights that would have been seen out of that particular cockpit. This aircraft flew, well, pretty much for 40 years all over the world. Australia, New Zealand, South America, the West Indies. In the 1970s, it was owned by an American test pilot called Captain Charles Blair. He was married to the Hollywood actress Maureen O'Hara, and she had that chair put in so she could sit with a little more comfort next to her husband on those long flights. It's even got an ashtray and a cup holder. Now, in many ways, looking at the Sunderland, it looks short and stocky. It is an incredibly robust aircraft, but imagine if you could travel the world in one of these once again. A real home away from home, a taste of aviation elegance. It wasn't just the British who recognised the military value of the flying boat. Other maritime nations, such as the US and Canada, also saw that it could have a vital role to play. I've come here to the Imperial War Museum at Duxford to take a closer look at the American answer to the short Sunderland, the PBY Catalina, and to meet a group of enthusiasts who have now dedicated themselves to keeping this veteran aircraft in the air. Hey fellas, it's Jeff up there.
Ah, Jules.
How are you, mate?
Good. How are you?
I'm very well. I'm very pleased to see this old lady.
Yeah, well, welcome to Duxford and to Miss Pickup.
Beautiful. This is much, much bigger than I was expecting.
Well, 104-foot wingspan. It's about the same size as a 737, so not small, that's for sure.
I've probably spent a bit too long looking at short Sunderlands to really appreciate just how beautiful this aircraft is. Can we take a closer look at the nose there? I'm fascinated by the sort of boat nature of it, the hull, as it were. Look at that. I love the flare.
Well, it is very much a hull, and of course it takes you back to the early days of flying boats, and it was a combination of marine and aviation coming together.
Can we take a closer look inside?
Yeah, come on around.
Wow.
Just watch your head, Jules.
I will. Gosh, it does certainly feel more boat than plane, doesn't it, when you get in there and you see the shape?
And you've come in the easy way. Wartime, they would have come in through one of these blisters.
The blisters do give you a remarkable view, don't they?
These were huge observation points. You had a fantastic panorama to look out for convoys, for downed airmen, spotting subs. It was quite a critical task.
And what would have been in this area here? You've obviously got some modern seats at the moment.
Yes, but in the old days, on one side you would have had some rest bunks, and on the other side, the port side, you would have had a galley there so as they could prepare some food.
But having a galley, that's quite a luxury in a wartime aircraft, isn't it?
It was. You wouldn't have found it in a lot of aircraft. Catalinas were special, but then Catalinas were special in the sense of their capability of flying long distances for a long period of time. So you needed something like that. But then, don't forget, flying up in the Arctic, it wasn't very warm up there, freezing conditions, so you needed some hot coffee to sustain you whilst the action was on.
Yeah, you'd certainly want to make sure the kettle was on, wouldn't you?
Yes, definitely.
All the way.
Yeah.
Come on then, Jeff, let's have a look around the rest of it.
Yes, come and see the rest of the aircraft.
This is fabulous, absolutely fabulous.
And you're coming into the engineer's compartment now. Jules, I'll climb in, and if you poke your head through, you'll be able to see what there is to see in terms of controls and instruments here in the cockpit.
Gosh, it really is pretty tight in here, isn't it?
It is. Catalina pilots are slim chaps.
There really isn't a lot of room, but great, again, all-round vision up here.
Yes, very much so. And you can see back behind you, obviously an excellent view to the front.
Yeah.
And if on the water, you can actually stand on the seat, provided you don't lean back into the props, you're all right.
And it's interesting, all the controls are up above you there.
Yes, a little bit different to wartime usage because the mixture controls and the fuel levers, they would have been in the pylon operated by the flight engineer. But by the very nature of how we operate the aircraft these days, having it all here gives the pilots total control of the operation.
Now, I gather that your chief engineer, Gary, is on top of the wing, is that right?
Yes, they're doing some work with the engine, so a case of, would you like to go up and see the size of the wing?
Well, I will. What's the best way up?
I think back that way and up through the ladder.
Right, I'll see you later.
Good.
Gary?
Hi, Jules. Come on up.
How'd you get up there, then?
Straight up the middle of it.
Little step here?
Yeah, I'll give you a hand if you like.
Oh, lovely.
There you go.
Wow.
Taking the view.
This is a sight you don't see every day.
No.
From the top of a Catalina. And it's lovely to see this huge expanse of wind. You don't see that on a modern aircraft because the fuselage is always in the way.
Exactly, it's in the way, but they've got the whole thing up here to run up and down.
It doesn't look as if it's actually attached to very much under there.
Just 6 bolts.
6 bolts?
Yeah.
But when you think about the stresses and strains that are going through the airframe and those 4 struts that are holding the wing on and all that power racing through these engines, through the airframe, is immense.
It is, but they obviously thought about it. But then they did the battleship thing and just overbuilt it.
What are the big challenges in maintaining a seaplane as opposed to a normal aircraft?
It's an aircraft, but it's also a boat. And of course boats float, and any damage to the lower hull means it's going to sink. So we have to make sure that the lower part of the hull is always watertight.
But the annual maintenance schedule that you're engaged in year after year is huge.
It's 70 pages. Yeah.
A checklist of 70 pages.
Yeah, and we have to look at everything on the checklist every year. So we're in here for 6 months.
And to your knowledge, Gary, how many Catalinas are still flying around the world?
I believe around about 10 currently still active.
Just 10?
Mm.
So despite all the work and all the huge expense that's involved, it is absolutely worthwhile, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I mean, the shareholders will testify to that. You know, you'd think, well, why would people want to do this? But they do.
Well, Gary, you've clearly got plenty to be getting on with. I won't hold you up anymore, but thank you very much indeed.
Jules, it's been a pleasure.
By the 1950s, Calshot was primarily used as a marine craft maintenance facility for the RAF. But with the decline of the seaplane and flying boat fleet, the base finally closed in 1961.
You know, unlike bombers and fighters, the seaplane is an altogether much more romantic proposition, combining those heady elements of air and water. These days, seaplanes still operate around the world, but often in its remoter parts. You'd be pretty lucky to see one. And I can't help but feeling that, in some ways, the seaplane tail was cut prematurely short. And I'm often left to wonder what would have happened if the scientists and engineers of yesterday had had the technology and the opportunity of today. I suspect, and I hope, that the seaplane story might have been very different.